Three Aboriginal kids go missing in the space of 6 months. Over 30 years later, we're still here, we're still telling our story about this, and each time the families are so frustrated because it's just like everything that we say or everything that we do just falls on deaf ears.
Welcome to the next episode of the Impact Policy Podcast. I've just got off the back of a big yarn with Jasmin Speedy. Jazz is a close friend of mine that I've known for a number of years. Comes from a background in the public sector, working in the Aboriginal affairs space for a significant period of time, and we had a really sort of big conversation around her connection to the story of the Bowraville murders. Not so much about the cases and that sort of stuff itself, but more specific to the journey of justice and campaigning and advocating that Jazz and those families have been navigating for decades now as well. It's a yarn that's very special to me, and that I've been privileged to be able to share that space with her to hear some of that story and the impact of that and what that means now for where those families are at in that journey for justice. There's no other case like that of the Bowraville families in the law, in the legal system in Australia today, that's gone as high as they have in terms of seeking justice for the murders of their three children. And so to be able to hear some of that is a real privilege. So thank you, Jazz, for bringing that and sharing that with us. And then we take from there a bit of a dive into the work that she's doing with Wildflower and the amazing goals that they are kicking across Gadigal country here in Sydney in terms of Aboriginal young people and employment and retention, what that means, how that looks, and not only that, the amazing services and impacts that Wildflower is having as a social enterprise for their clients, massive clients like Sydney International Airport, Taronga Zoo, to name a few. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Really took a lot out of it, and thank you for joining. Cheers.
So I'm Jasmin Speedy. I'm a Kamilaroi woman. I grew up in Tenterfield in northern New South Wales, and I've lived in Sydney now for over 20 years. So I've been here and I've worked across multiple community organisations, and now I'm back in government. Been with Aboriginal Affairs for about 8 years, and worked across the agency in many different roles. Also working in the community with Wildflower as a board of director, working with Matthew and Roman, the co-founders of that, and just trying to steer them in the right direction of, the strategic alignment and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, personally I do the Bowraville, what can you say, I advocate for my family for the Bowraville murders that took place over 30 years ago. So, and along with raising 3 boys, so working full time, I just have a really busy lifestyle. So everything's crazy. Everything's, as soon as I open my eyes, I'm just up and out the door, thinking about all these different, things that I'm working on. So it never ends.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I think I'll start off with the Bowraville stuff. So, Clinton Speedy Duro, known as Bubby, he was my first cousin. Our mums are sisters and our dads are brothers, so we're pretty close. And I was only 5 or 6 when all this happened in the Bowraville community, and that trauma, what happened at that time, and the family, the impacts of what that had on my family is very much still ingrained in my core memories of what happened,
as a child and that?
As a child, yeah. And for me today, that trauma is still there. As a mum of 2 teenage Aboriginal boys, that whole trauma has given me the anxiety that I have today of raising 2 young men, ensuring they are safe, 2 teenagers. So I have 2 teenagers and a 3-year-old, And I just feel like, that trauma is just, 30 years later for myself as a young child, it's just been generational.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then, for me, the fight for justice for Bubby and Evelyn and Colleen has been ongoing since I've moved to Sydney. I've been actively involved, so over 20 years. And I wear many different hats in that fight for justice. I'm an advocate for my family.
Yeah.
I talk for the family. You'll see at times I'm often like being approached to be interviewed and in the media and all that kind of stuff. So I wear all these different types of hats, and that's also me, just the person I am. I care for my family.
Yeah.
And what drives my passion to fight for justice is to seeing the hurt and the pain and the suffering that my auntie June, Clinton's mum, and Uncle Thomas, his dad, have every day, like even to now.
Yeah.
So recently re-attended a hearing on the what was it? Missing and murdered Aboriginal women and children in Australia. So they've done a Commonwealth parliamentary inquiry into that.
Yeah.
And the Bowraville family were one of the first families that were, heard on the submissions that they've done. So 30 years later, we're still here. We're still telling our story about this, and each time the families are so frustrated because it's just like everything that we say or everything that we do just falls on deaf ears.
Yeah. And you often have to, with the Senate inquiry, was that retelling that experience of what happened at the start when the kids were missing?
Yeah. So that was it. And then we had to retell that story again.
Yep.
And that was, you could see, all the families in that meeting room that day were very frustrated.
Yeah.
Because we know, for us, over 30 years of fighting, it never goes anywhere.
Yeah.
We tell our story, and that's traumatizing.
Absolutely.
Over and over again. And so some families were very frustrated in that Senate inquiry, in that hearing. And just not understanding what that was. So, we have all these, government kind of inquiries coming to us, wanting to tell our story. Yeah. And the family's not quite understanding exactly what this information is for and where it will lead to.
Totally.
So, there's those types of barriers that we face as well. So
a bit of pressure on you coming from obviously you've spent 8 years working in the public sector, right? So for the most part, these are government processes or, navigating government systems, whether it's justice or whatever hat it's sort of looking at. Does that pressure come on you a little bit because you have that insight coming from the public sector?
Yeah, it does, because my family expect me to know everything. You know what I mean? Like, I can only help as much as I can because there could be a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
But they're also my family, and that's also my job.
Yeah.
But, regardless of my job, my family come first, and I do what I can to help them. So,
totally.
The last session we did with the Senate was pretty difficult for my family because they didn't provide any financial funding or anything like that to get them to, because it was in Coffs Harbour.
Yeah.
So I rallied up with the Senate to provide that funding. So I'm like writing letters. I'm like, these people need funding. We just don't have $2,000 to travel to Coffs Harbour, So, there's all these things that come into play, and I don't think, these agencies or all these government bodies coming in quite don't understand what impacts that these types of things have on the families. So I had that discussion with one of the what were they called? What do they call them on the panel members on the hearing committee?
Yeah.
I caught him at the airport in Coffs Harbour on my way out. Yeah. I called him in the corner. I was like, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I said, if you're going to do this across Australia, our family were the first ones off the bat. I said, these are the things that you need to take into place,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
ensure that these things don't happen at the next hearings that you have. They provided counsellors, but they weren't cultural Aboriginal First Nation counsellors, and that's what us Aboriginal people need, because that's what we feel comfortable with. You know what I mean? So provided all this feedback, and he's writing down pretty quickly. He's like, I've got to go to the airport. I've got to go and catch my plane. So
you'll get the next one.
Yeah. So poor fellow, he got called, and I was thinking, he'd be thinking, I hope I don't bump into her again.
Luck, but that you were at the airport at the same time, and you had someone with your insight to be able to provide that feedback at the start of that journey. Hopefully that feedback makes the accessibility for other families so much more,
streamlined and easier. Like, I shouldn't be writing letters and emails and phone calls to get this certain funding for my family. That should already be available. There should be a pool of that funding available in the first instance for families who have to travel.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Blackfullas don't have that kind of money laying around.
Not at
especially
all.
in the country where there's lack of employment, or the elders, you know what I mean? Like, there's those types of barriers. So just some things that these, agencies and these government bodies need to start thinking about when you're going into community.
Definitely. And, because a very small professional connection to Bowraville from the work that I was doing in that space, and that's probably around the time when we first met. And at that time, Aboriginal Affairs was quite active in that space in supporting families as best they could. But they also had, I guess, probably Aboriginal leaders that were connected to those places and those families that could give that insight and that
that's exactly what comes to my mind. Like, at that time, they had Tracy. You know what I mean? She was connected to the area. She knew the families. She knew the case. She grew up. She knew what it was about. She probably was impacted at some point in one way or another.
Absolutely.
So when you have these types of people in agencies that can advocate for these things that happen, like the Bowraville murders, well, that makes it easier. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, if they've probably got a new project officer up there that wouldn't know anything about the Bowraville murders, so that same type of support that was offered in the past wasn't there this time. Absolutely.
And with the time where I was involved in that sort of space, it was at the same time that the Court of Criminal Appeal stuff was happening. So can you sort of give us an overview for anyone listening in terms of the significance from a justice perspective? Because I think, like, that's not only is the history of this so significant, but also it's quite a significant legislation was changed alongside this journey in terms of double jeopardy. That was one of the first things to test that stuff. Like, can you sort of, for anyone listening that maybe doesn't understand that side of the journey as well?
Yeah, sure. So that's a tough one, because it brings that trauma of dealing with government for me and our families, that we've never been given justice, and that's because of the justice system. And that's because of, for me, it's colonisation and the colony that we face. And the systems and the justice and the legal frameworks and all that kind of stuff that they put in place, which makes it really hard for our families. So, this case has been through multiple court cases, parliamentary inquiries. Like you said, we've changed legislation in double jeopardy. But each and every single time we've come up against roadblock after roadblock. So one of the most recent court hearing that we had was with the High Court of Australia, and that was to find out if we were able to have all three cases heard together. And it was a really hard time, sorry. So we had this so we went to the High Court of Australia, and we had barristers, and we had John Barner behind us, Larissa Brent, and all that kind of stuff. So We had all the right people behind us. We had everything that they'd asked for us to provide. And then we had the hearing, and again, our family were let down because of a simple term in the double jeopardy legislation around the word adduced. And
That's
so
right.
this
right.
means that, well, the term hasn't really been narrowed down. So we can't, and they still won't give us that information about what this adduced word means.
Yep.
And so what happened was that there was fresh and compelling evidence to take these these three matters to court, and the evidence that was provided was already available. So that meant that it wasn't fresh.
Yeah.
It's compelling evidence.
Yeah.
But the evidence and that's because of that term adduced, is why we can't use the compelling evidence. It's fresh evidence, but it was available at the time, so that makes it not fresh, according to the legislation. So, our families were let down again, and were, told that that was the last leg of our fight for justice, and there was nothing else that could be done in terms of fighting the legal system and bringing forward this person before the court.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
and I can imagine that, like, it only triggers all those years of the system letting all the families down in that journey for justice, because so much of what failed in the past with some of those court cases was the impacts of systemic racism and the court process not being handled appropriately, and evidence not being tabled correctly, or inconsistencies and inadequacies at a systemic level.
Well, that's the thing. It was a botched case from the very start. Like, our families had no hope in terms of having that investigation done properly, because at the end of the day, they were black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, 3 Aboriginal kids go missing in the space of 6 months, and all these families just got back from the police, or they've gone walkabout.
Yeah.
There was one even to say that that's not her child because she was blonde hair and blue eyes. You know what I mean? Like, there's these types of, I'd say, shit that our family have had to deal with.
Totally.
And then, and this is me hearing stories along the way in my 20-year fight for justice. You know what I mean? Like, the families were being investigated by child protection because the case wasn't actually being investigated. It was the families being investigated.
Yeah. I remember hearing that,
Yeah, like, these are the...
That's who they sent in. Yeah.
It's just really horrible. Like, these poor families have had to endure this, and that was the basis of Lulu. Michelle Jarrett. That's her opening statement every time. Why were we investigated and not, the actual case?
Absolutely.
Or the police involved too, because you know what I mean. They've got to be held accountable as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Is it true that the former head of police flew into Bowra on a helicopter before he retired or something? Did you ever hear that yarn? I heard that Scipione, pretty sure it was him, flew into Bowraville before he retired and apologised to the families on behalf of New South Wales Police.
Oh, you know what? He probably did,
Yeah.
and I was probably there. But I think after a while you just get sick of it, eh? Like, you just get so sick and tired of these people coming in, because that at the end of the day, it's not really for what we're there for, what we're fighting for. Or I think a lot of them are there just to, oh, look at me, look what I'm doing. Like, this is a high profile case, and at that time it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's all splashed over the news and everything.
Totally.
And he probably did. I remember going to something up there.
Yeah.
And there was a police commissioner there. Whether it was him, I don't know. But
yeah.
You know what I mean? And these apologies mean nothing unless there's some sort of action that follows it. And nothing's happened.
Is there much talk amongst the families coming off the back of the High Court of Australia judgment? And if anyone listening, like, I don't think you can sort of underestimate how significant that is. Like, the High Court of Australia, there is no more higher legal recourse anybody can go through for anything in this country than there. So for a 30-year plus fight for justice for these families to be ending up at the High Court of Australia is history setting sort of stuff. And coming off the back of the families not getting the results that you wanted from that, what does that mean? What are the yarns amongst family in terms of what's next?
Well, I think a lot of the families, for me, and I know everyone that I saw that day in Coffs Harbour at the Senate hearing, that the fight's not over.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will ever be over until we have some sort of justice. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, of course.
And I said this from the very start. I did I sat on the panel with the Just Us story they did on ABC, I think it was, and it was one thing I've always said, it will be passed on to generations.
Yeah.
The fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, totally. I'm probably I'm second generation, and now it's going to be passed on to my kids.
Yeah.
If it's never resolved.
Yeah.
But, you know, there is talk of some sort of financial compensation to the families, but no money can ever...
Yeah, never.
You know,
never.
That's not justice.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
And, you know, what they were offering the families as well isn't really much.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No. For the... Yeah. You can never compensate anything like that. Not to mention the decades of ongoing trauma as a result of the system on top of what happened that can ever come close, you know?
Yeah. I'll also talk about how Gary Jublin was involved. He was the lead detective in this.
Yeah.
And he built those relationships with the families, and it wasn't always welcoming for him.
Yep.
And, you know, he was with our families for a really long time. And he's a white cop, like he's a white copper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Never worked with community, never worked with Blackfullas before. So he actually eventually came around. Like, he even said, I've never really thought this case was built on racism. And that, you know, that was his thought process at the time. But as he got to know the families, he came to realise that this was because of racism. Yeah. That these kids, you know, the police didn't do their job. There was no thorough investigations into the 3 kids going missing. Or, you know, if they would have investigated the first one in the first place, maybe the other 2 would have been okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was actively involved with our families and the case for a really long time. And then he, as you know, I don't know if you know, but he was fired from the police force.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's all their type of bullshit. But since he's left, I know that the families have struggled to find that connection again with the current investigators.
Totally.
And again, you know, that relationship building with Aboriginal people and communities takes a really long time and takes years. So, you know, they're reaching out to the families and asking all these questions, but, you know, Gary jumped in the car and drove to Bowraville.
Yeah.
He spent time up there.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And they just don't have that at the moment. So from a police investigation perspective, we're really unsure of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
You know, there was talk about DNA testing and all this type of stuff, but nothing is really, we don't know.
Nothing's clear.
We don't know what's going on. So we would really like to get that relationship built up again with the police and figure out what is going on. Yeah.
For anyone that's listening who works in the justice space or even the community space where they're working with families, you know, working with Blackfullas and that, what is some of the things that they can take away in terms of what you've seen work well? You know, you talked about Gary and his ability to do that. I'm sure you've come across other people that have done good work with our communities in the past. What do you think what are the ingredients that people need to know when they're coming into this sort of space?
A true understanding of Aboriginal people, their communities, you know, what communities have been through, the impacts of colonisation have had on our people, like, and then I guess respect. Like, if you don't have respect for Aboriginal people, their culture, their experiences, and their knowledge, well, then you won't get very far.
Totally.
You know, I can say for one person who I love and adore and I work with at the moment, and that's Britt Jacobson. You know her. You know what I mean?
I was
Like,
talking to her yesterday.
yeah,
She's mad.
like she's got the most utmost respect for our people, for our
Yeah.
culture, for everything. Like, she's working on the languages trust, and you know, you don't get very many of them. I must say.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so
100%.
those are the top ingredients, I reckon. And she's always, you know, asking questions, and we've actually formed a really good friendship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
It's it is rare, eh?
very rare.
I always often think about, like, a big part of it as well that I feel like when I meet people like Brit and others that I've come across is it's this ability to, like, it's like you sort of got to be invited in to our space.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like this ability to be okay, like, not to be, you know, or know when to, like, you know, I think it takes time. Like, you sort of talk about that Gary stuff as well, like, and the struggle with new people coming into that sort of space, trying to ask questions, do all this sort of stuff. Like, there's a certain, like, time that goes into, like, being invited into spaces and being, you know, given permission to speak and all that sort of stuff, or things like that. But I often think about that when I think about, like, allies in our space, you know, and the ability to, like, know your place.
Yeah.
And then I think once you earn your place, like,
you're like a brother.
Yeah.
You know, that's
but you
great.
but you got to earn it, right? Like, you can't just walk in and think, like, nah, I'm right. Like, so
it takes time.
Yeah,
definitely does.
She'll listen to that because she's listened to a couple of the podcasts there. It's probably the only person who listens to them.
Hey, I listen to your podcast.
Oh, man, thank you. You've been kind because you're on it now. No.
So she's you don't get many Gary Jublins, many Britt Jacobsons, and when you do, it feels like you found a diamond in, you know, in the rough. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm always very conscious about talking about this sort of space, the Bowraville stuff. For me, like, it was a really like, when I worked on that sort of work, it was also, like, it was weird when I worked on it, because I'd come into Aboriginal Affairs and then I was going to quit. I put my letter of resignation in after 4 weeks because I was responding to Coro and letters, and I was like, oh, fuck this, I'll go back to community. And then Jason Adler at the time was like, oh, this common opportunity's come up. We need someone who sort of comes from the community sector to understand it. And then, so within, like, sending my letter of resignation to, like, that yarn, the next week I was at planning, you know, doing this solution brokerage stuff. And I'd never met Tracy and the Coffs mob and that. Like, I hadn't been around for a while. But suddenly I found myself, like, one out travelling up to Coffs and going out to Bowra and doing that sort of work. And it was like, I was literally, like, the only project worker doing that at the time where I was at. But so I go out to Bowra by myself and spent a lot of time with Lulu and different people in the family. And it was hard because I also had a son at the same time who was the same age as Evelyn when Evelyn went missing. And I found it really affected me. I didn't realise at the time how much it had affected me. And something that we never talk about really is and the guys that produce this stuff too, like, we produced something special for the families around the we did some video stuff for them around the healing garden that was released, because we were having a yarn with some of the families about how you talked about access at the start. Like, we can do all this stuff that's, like, about having your voice heard, or it's about healing, it's about all this sort of thing, but people don't recognize that, like, it's one thing to be able to do it, but then it's also another thing to make it accessible for people to be a part of. I remember we were having a yarn about, like, we're doing this stuff and it's a real big part of, like, family's healing journey and all this sort of thing, but then at the same time family members were like, I've got family that can't be here for it because of, you know, A, B and C. They can't get here. And so with the permission of the families, we said, Andrew, who's here with us today, like we said, like if you're comfortable, like we can capture it, like film it and record it, and it's for you. It's for you and your families, you know, and you can have that, and you can do with it what you want, like, but just as a way to be able to, you know, have that as a recognizing that as a part of that journey, you know, and that there's people that can't see it or be a part of it as well. But like, yeah, I don't know. I think those times for me in Bowra, I'll never forget, because I don't think like you can spend time with families that have been through so much, and not walk away from that feeling different than what you walked in.
Yeah.
And I don't even talk about it a lot, so it's hard to put it into words, you know.
Yeah.
But the strength I got from working in that community, you know, alongside your family members and other families as well, significantly shaped who I am today, professionally and personally, you know. There's no way that it couldn't, I don't think. I think that goes for most people that have been in that space.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't think you'll ever come across anything like it, like our families, the case, particularly around how the strength and the resilience and the courage that the families have carried for over 30 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're never going to come across that again.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't want anyone to either. And don't get me wrong, there are cases out there, you know, that are probably in a similar situation to us. But I just feel like over 30 years of fighting and not stopping, you can see how the families have that impact on people like yourself that go out to these communities. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
Yeah. And like, you know, like I said, we're probably now in a similar situation where we probably have that anxiety with our children.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Every time my kids walk at the door, I'm like, where are you going? Who are you going with? What are you doing?
Totally.
And I ring, and if they don't answer, I keep ringing. Totally. And they make this joke, oh, here she goes, sending out her search party. I'm like, oh, God, you know, I'm like, well, you know, hopefully one day they will understand. Yeah. They'll have children on their own one day, and they'll be like, now I know why my mum was the way she was.
Totally.
You know what I mean? If my kids are not home by a certain time, if I know they're coming home, I'm like on that phone, I'll jump in the car and go and look for them. Like, definitely. They're 19 and 16. Yeah. And, you know, I look at my son, Bubba, and it's so uncanny that he's been called Bubba and then Bubby. Bubba's 16 right now. And I look at him and I just think, you have a striking resemblance to Bubby. And I just look at him and I just think, I can never fathom what my auntie and my uncle have been through. Like, that would be so horrific. Yeah. And I could not imagine that happening to my child. And I probably don't even know how I would be. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, they are the most strongest, most resilient two that I know, and I love and adore them, and everything I do is for them. You know what I mean? Everything I do, every time I'm down marching and protesting down the street for Bubby and for the Bowraville kids, they are in the back of my mind, because at the end of the day, as a parent, I can never ever imagine what they feel. Totally. And absolutely. You know, the circumstances, that's just like, you'll just go to sleep at night thinking, what the fuck? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I know for me that would be the last thought of my mind. You know what I mean? I just think that's some horrific circumstances. So, you know what I mean? And I think that's probably why the families continued to fight for justice, because the way that these 3 children were taken and the circumstances and the murders, it's just fucked, really. Yeah.
How can anyone that's listening be a part of supporting anything that's happening? Is there a way for people to be involved in raising? I mean, it's a very notorious, you know, case and journey that it's been on, but what's the best ways that people can try and get behind what's happening? Because like you said, families haven't given up on that journey and things like
Yeah.
that.
Well, for me, like there are multiple social media pages, like all the families have one for the children. Get behind those and follow those and look for any updates that that's posted. I manage Clinton's page, so, and I guess just do your research and get yourself familiar with it, and feel as outraged as we are.
Absolutely.
Why this case hasn't been brought forward.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
why is there a technical term that's holding back bringing justice to these 3 children?
That's it.
When all the evidence obviously points to one person.
Yeah, that's it.
So, that's the way we can probably get the support for now.
Yeah.
If we ever do another rally or a protest, definitely get behind us.
Yeah.
And I think there might be one coming up soon enough, so we can get that kind of momentum going again with the, getting the feedback from the police or getting those relationships built. There was a letter written to the New South Wales government over 2 years ago. There's been no response.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? So something's probably in the pipeline soon enough, I reckon.
Yeah, very important stuff you mentioned there, particularly around the response from government and outrage too, and selective outrage. And anyone that's listening here now, if you're not across the history of the Bowraville murders, there's no excuse not to be. Go out, listen to the podcasts. There's a movie that came out not too long ago about a documentary movie about the case. Plethora of articles and stuff out there that you can hear, and put yourself in the shoes for a moment of the families when you look at this and listen to this and watch this in terms of despite the overwhelming amount of evidence and fight for justice for so many years to the highest court in Australia, ultimately what it's come down to is the definition of language, and if that doesn't outrage, if the death of 3 young people and the justice of that doesn't come down to making you wild, that the gap there is a word, then it's time to keep, it's time to join, and be a part of the solution, because that's what we're here for. That's what it's about. And your families have been fighting this one for decades now, and I'm sure you've had a lot of support along the way as well, throughout broader communities and stuff. But anyone that's listening, please be a part of the solution, be a part of following the journey. Keep the pressure on when there's advocating to government and for anything like that as well. Anything you'd want to say to anyone outside of that?
No, I think I've said what I've had to say, and I just feel like 30 years is a really long time. Actually, it's 33 years of fighting for justice, and no family should ever be put in this situation. And I just feel like the pressure probably needs to be put on the government again to make some movement, make some traction, respond to families and that kind of stuff. And like I said, do some research and get informed.
Definitely.
I'm
conscious that this is a area that we could talk about for a really long time, and there's so much pain and trauma in it, but there's also so much strength and resilience in it. And whilst it's important to recognize that we're sitting in a space where there's a lot of trauma and pain, I think it's really important to also, before we move into talking about what's next, is to really acknowledge and recognize the strength of all the families for so long, and the journey that you've been on, because I think that that's really special and really significant and something that you have to highlight.
Thank you.
On that sort of theme around strength and resilience and that sort of space, why don't we have a yarn about the Wildflower stuff?
Oh yeah.
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 So For anyone who's listening, Wildflower, Aboriginal owned and led social enterprise based here on Gadigal country in Sydney. Largely work in caring for country, horticulture, agriculture, all that sort of stuff. Kicking some big goals. But do you want to talk to us about, I don't know, what your insights are into the world of Wildflower and why you think it's doing so well?
Yeah, so I actually was approached by Raymond and Matthew to be on the initial board when Wildflower firstly, was initiated and started. And I was on the board, and I was probably one of the most vocal ones there, and always throwing around ideas and all that kind of stuff. So when they wanted to change the dynamics of the organisation of the business, they've changed it to a board of directors.
Yep.
And there's only a few of us now, and we have some members on that board of directors. I'm one of the board of directors. I have 2 sons that work with Wildflower, and their father is one of the co-founders of Wildflower. And I think it's one of them, one of the biggest projects that I've had that I feel very passionate about. And well, for me personally, I've always wanted to work with young fellas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've always wanted to work in that space with youth, particularly around the mentoring, the juvenile justice system. I really wanted to work in that space, but I think after you have your own kids, it just becomes kind of a conflict.
Yeah.
And especially when your kids getting in trouble.
Yeah. And I know we've had that conversation a few times over the years about different ideas for, around the glebe community, particularly back in the day, and different things like that. So I know it's something you've always been passionate about. Yeah,
so it's something, and when they've given me the opportunity to be involved, I'll put my hand up straight away.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd love to be involved, you know what I mean? That's something that I've wanted to do. And what a way to do it, caring for country, out on country, working with Mother Earth, connecting in this way. And when they first started, it was just a couple of boys here and there coming on, pretty small jobs here and there, nothing really, big, but they kind of just blew up overnight.
Yeah.
Like when you think about it, 2 years ago, we were sitting in a meeting room in George Street in Redfern, planning and figuring out how we're going to take this to the next level, and then next minute they're just getting so much work thrown at them, and then so now they've got 15 young Aboriginal men that work every day. 5 of those boys are full-time, the rest are casual, but the aim is to get all them boys into full-time employment.
Totally.
And these are boys that have grown up in Redfern, Waterloo, Glebe, Woolloomooloo, that have never had an opportunity. You know what I mean? Like, they've been probably had jobs and they wouldn't have that cultural kind of care that was needed for young Aboriginal men.
That mentoring.
The mentoring side of things. And like these boys, they're very spoiled, I must say. You know what I mean? Like, they've been given this opportunity, and they're just taken care of really well. You know what I mean? So, just the outcomes that this organisation brings to the community for these young fellas. Some of our boys are in and out of juvenile justice.
Yep.
Some of them are over 18. Some of them, in trouble with the police. Some of them have young babies, like they're kids themselves and they have babies.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, finding that balance for them, for these young fellas to have sustainable employment, to work with their mates, to work on country, and learning about the cultural side of things, all the native plants and how to plant things, is just something that's just, it's amazing. Like, I'm so proud of Matt, and I'm proud of Rome. Like, they've done a really good job with how they've thought about this, how they wanted to do Wildflower. And for me, I've just come in and I'm more or less helping in a strategic kind of way for them and on the business and that kind of stuff, and also the mentoring side with the boys. So I've come out to Redfern and I facilitated a session with them because a lot of the boys were just fucking around and coming to work late and leaving whenever they wanted to. So I was like, right, let's get these boys in this fucking meeting room right now. Pull them all into line, and they all come in and they're all sitting around and they're all just laughing and joking around. And I sat down. I was like, rightio, shut up. This is what we're doing today. We're going to go through what Wildflower is, what what we're doing in the next 12 months, and we engage them, and we want them to be a part of that process of this is what you're going to be doing in the next 12 months. What's your interest? You know what I mean? That type of stuff. But we also had to have that blunt discussion of what are you doing here? If you're not serious, don't be here. You know what I mean? There's probably 10 other boys who are could take your place tomorrow.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But these boys are family now. They've become our family. We look after them. They've been given many chances, I must say. But you know what I mean? Like, they're like our kids. So, I had that facilitated session with the boys and I just talked to them, like having some good values and some work ethics to get you through the day and through the week. You know what I mean? Like, these are the things that you need.
Totally.
And just trying to work together. And I, had a bunch of words up on the board and I said, these are the values. What are yours? Let's talk about it. So we had that session with the boys. I did an icebreaker. I did one of those trivias. And I had like 10, 15 questions. And that was the icebreaker. And all the boys were laughing at the end of it. And I was like, all right, that's it now. They're like, that's it. I'm like, yes, that's it. We're going to get to business now. You know what I mean? So getting them engaged in that way too. But, and then having that discussion with the boys about what's your story? Where do you see yourselves in 5 years? What does Wildflower mean to you? And we had all the boys around that table sit up and talk. And they were very passionate about what they do. And they love the work. They love the workplace and the things that they're doing. And I said, well, that's really good. But your work ethic has to be aligned to these things that you want. You know what I mean? And they're young boys. So trying to instill that in them has been a bit difficult, but I think we're getting there slowly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you can see that in the work that they're doing across Sydney. So they've had Taronga Zoo recently, went over there and did a cultural space over there. And you can just see how proud these boys are of their work.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like, they get the likes of Taronga Zoo, they've got Sydney Park, they go out there and, more or less do the maintenance out there. They've had Woolworths in Manly where they've done a cultural space over there too.
Wow. Sydney Airport as well.
Sydney Airport, so Sydney International Airport, when you first walk out, you'll see a native garden. You know what I mean? So these are the types of work that Wildflower's doing and the boys are doing as well. So you just say, I don't know, you follow their page on Instagram. Like, they're so proud, Like,
big fan of them.
They're so proud and we're proud of them too. So they're doing really good. There's heaps of more work in the pipelines. There's so much to come up. So
it's exciting.
It's really exciting.
I love their stuff because you see all this. I think one thing that's really valuable having you on the board of directors there is because you do have that public sector lens and experience, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the work that they're playing in as well is in that space too. So having someone like you who has that understanding and background is really valuable. But I think about you see so many targets in terms of Aboriginal participation in construction or development, and all these tenders get to granted based on percentage of Aboriginal staff actually working, and there's always yarns around community about the reality of how that translates. And one thing I love about Wildflower is when I first started seeing them blow up, I was like, I know that lad, or I straight away know that these are kids from the communities where I've grown up around, so I know that they're all local boys. And then I'm seeing the same faces again and again and again, so I know that they're not just disappearing. And then you see so much stuff around retention of Aboriginal staff. But this is an organisation that's retaining Aboriginal young people but you talk about like some of the key ingredients, right? Is about like working with like there's like mentoring has to be critical for a lot of these young people. Like you said, they've got stuff going on with justice. They're young parents. They might be the first job, you know, or they're coming from a home where there's a lot of stuff going on, and they're bringing a lot of that to work. I remember a yarn with Rome and Maddie. At one point, they were saying about how they were doing a job. I can't remember where, but they were picking the boys up in the morning and then taking them out, and then you get a feed on the way. And while they're going out there, they're like talking about what's going on at home, what's going on with life, all this sort of thing. And so before they even got to the site in the morning, the boys there's been transport, there's been a feed, there's been mentoring already before they've even started their day at work.
Job. Yeah.
You know, and people don't realize this. Like if you're actually serious about employing and retaining Aboriginal young people, that's got to come with how we look at that sort of space. You know, and I think for me, when I seen the impact of that sort of work, it's like people don't realize. They just think like, oh yeah, we're gonna do a development and we're going to employ 100 young people, but they just think like by having a job existing that everyone's going to be lining up out the door to just do it. But they don't realize like, you know, so much. Even just having a drive, even just transport is a massive gap in our communities and a massive barrier to employment, particularly for young people too, right? Like, so even just like, there's a whole complex sort of, you know, range of reasons that get in the way of success when it comes to employment and retention, particularly for young people in our communities. And I just think like, again, like Wildflower's led by Blackfullas, right? So like, we know that, and we just embed that in our way of working.
And that's the thing too, like now that you say that, we actually know from first-hand experience and lived experience of what these boys go through on the daily. Like for me, I know, you know, 2 of them are my sons. And for me, it's a struggle getting one out of bed. But for one's up at the door by 6:30 every day. You know what I mean? And that makes me so proud. But he's so proud of his job. And then he goes and does the rounds. He's got a car. I've given him a car. So he goes and picks up all these boys for work. And they all go to work together.
Yeah, beautiful.
You know what I mean? So also instilling that in these boys and with the boys that have the cars and the transport, help the boys out, you know what I mean? Totally. And I think that helps when they're able to do that.
Definitely.
And just having that key understanding of, you know, what could be going on at home. Or what's happening why did you leave school? You know what I mean? Like all these little things play a major part into the everyday lives of our boys. So for me, I understand. I'm a mum first and foremost, you know what I mean? So all these boys, I'm like a mum to them. And you know, it's probably the same with Matt and Rome.
Totally.
Just a big family, really. But because we're actually growing. We're gonna, you know, it's going this way pretty fast. And I said to Rome, I'm like, these 15 boys are not going to be enough. So we're going to have to start expanding and looking out how we can get some more young fellas. But we want to change the gender equality too. Like we want some girls out there as well, you know what I mean? But that's a bit worrisome because we just don't know how these boys will carry on. They can be, you know.
Yeah, that's it.
I say to them on a work site and I'll just sit there and I'm just like, oh God.
Bless.
So, you know, I know with a lot of the boys, I said to Rome and I said, let's start capturing the numbers and the data around the boys that have been in and out of justice, in and out of the police, you know. Let's try and start capturing this data because that's useful information. It's useful data that we can have to leverage when we want to apply for some grants to have the, you know, actually probably implementing a formal kind of mentoring program within Wildflower.
Absolutely.
So, you know, these are the types of things that we're working on at the moment is trying to get that. Going around talking to all the boys, you know, getting their story, finding out, you know, who's been in the system, and if they don't want to talk about it, that's fine. You know, we don't do criminal checks or anything like that. So, you know, the boys, we have that understanding of those boys that are in and out of the justice system. So
definitely.
Yeah, which can be tough.
Yeah, massively,
Yeah.
massively.
Yeah.
It's exciting times, but like I think if you can, because that's the thing. Like I look at Wildflower, like not only are they kicking goals professionally as a social enterprise and delivering amazing services and products to all these massive clients, but they're also on the other hand doing this amazing like social impact for like our communities, because not only are they providing that employment stuff for those young fellas there, but like that flows on to other people in our community. Like other young people are seeing those boys working at Wildflower, and that means something,
Yeah.
because there was nothing like that in our communities when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So like the flow-on effect is massive, and all this funding going in to close the gap around closing employment, increasing employment and all these other factors. We know that like the success of what Wildflower is having in terms of the flow-on for all these other close the gap key indicators and stuff, it's all, you can connect all those dots 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I think someone like you guys could probably come out and probably do a story on them.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
definitely.
they'd be definitely keen to talk about it.
Yeah.
Getting the young boys and having a yarn to them, because that's another thing too, is that they want to try and get some more exposure into Wildflower. Like you said, there's nothing around like Wildflower.
Yeah.
There's nothing been around. Like, I consider myself lucky that my kids have something to go to. You know what I mean? Like, I think if TJ or Bubba had just gone into a mainstream job, they probably would have been sacked by now.
Yeah.
Any of their boys, actually. You know what I mean? Like, I just
Yeah.
feel like they have the opportunity that Wildflower has given these kids, and that's because of how Matthew especially grew up and didn't have those opportunities.
Yeah.
Matthew was, constantly harassed by the police. He's been in and out of, jail and that kind of stuff. So
Totally.
he knows exactly what these young fellas need.
Yeah.
And then you have Roman, who's done the gardening side of things, and he's grown up with Matthew, so he's probably hasn't had the same sort of same impacts or same kind of lived experience as Matthew in terms of what Matt's had, but what they've formed together is probably priceless when you think about it. Like,
absolutely.
It's crazy. Like, I just think you guys should be so proud of yourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, it's exciting.
They've done really well.
Times.
Wildflower, it's like a little newborn baby, I think.
Well, get on board now. Whoever's listening, like, follow the work of Wildflower. They're really active on Instagram, really active on LinkedIn for any people in the public sector and private space that are listening or watching along. If you're looking for a community social enterprise to invest in, partner with, and get behind, I'll bet my house on Wildflower. They're one to watch. So, I think coming towards the end, is there anything else that you'd want to sort of highlight based on?
Definitely. Also around the community work that Wildflower has done recently around the death of young Jai Wright.
Yeah.
So he was a really good friend of my son Matthew.
Yep.
And they were a big part of the community, Kylie and Lockie. So we wanted to build a space for them and the families and the community and friends, somewhere where they can go and remember Jai.
Yep.
So Wildflower actually did a garden down out South Everleigh in memory of Jai.
Yeah.
And we worked with the families. We got their permission. It was their idea, so they led the ideas of how they wanted the garden to be done, and they wanted a yarning circle and somewhere where they can sit around and talk and share memories about Jai. So these are the types of stuff that Wildflower are doing as well, not just going out and trying to get contracts and gardens and all this type of stuff. We also we're putting back into the community. And that's something that they're pretty proud of. So if you're ever in South Everleigh, get down there and have a look at that garden. It's something special for Wildflower and for the families of young Jai.
That's so powerful, and I'm so glad that you touched on that before we sort of come to the end, because I think they're the examples of the incredible stuff that's coming out of that space. And that's what happens when organisations and the people within them are like where it's like there's that cultural safety there and that capability, and that trust is there, you know, because like you said, like, you know, your son very close friends with Jai, but ultimately it was the families, right, that invited Wildflower in to do that work.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that speaks volumes to the integrity of the people in Wildflower and the young people as part of that, to be a part of that journey too.
Yeah.
And it just it speaks volumes to that sort of stuff. And so, like Jazz said, if you can get down to South Everleigh, spend some time at that space, I think it talks to a whole other layer of what the work that they're doing means in terms of caring for country, and that's its connection to healing and all that sort of work there as well. So yeah, very special way to sort of bring our yarn to an end.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you so much for taking
Thank
the
you
time
for having me.
come here and share some space.
Thanks.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.